Good morning, my fellow astute, intelligent, insightful patriots. Take a look at this story from CNN World. European leaders seized more power during the pandemic. Few have exit plans to hand it back. When I read that headline, the first thought that came to mind is this was CNN's cognitive dissonance dialed up to 100. Then I read this story and I changed my mind for several reasons. Number one, they are talking only Europe. And number two, the two people that wrote this story, the first one, Luke, well, he produces CNN International. And the second person, Saskia, she's based in Paris. Now, it seems to me that Europe and the US and Canada are intertwined. So not to mention that many of these same policies that happened in Europe where the government seized power also happened in the United States and Canada. Well, it is at the very minimum a glaring omission. Let's go on with this story though, and you'll see what I mean. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives across Europe due to the Wuhan flu, and many more have suffered long-term ill health after contracting the disease. They're not the only casualties of the pandemic. Democratic norms have also been seriously dented by a year of restrictions, and experts now fear power-hungry politicians could be reluctant to give up their near total authority once the crisis is over. Couldn't those first two paragraphs, if you substitute Europe for Western culture, also pertain to the United States and Canada? In France, for instance, Parliament approved a bill earlier this week that extends the country's state of emergency until late September. The bill also allows President Emmanuel Macron to introduce a health pass. How about a health passport? Then you could say it's just like the US and Canada, showing whether someone has been vaccinated against COVID-19 or not, as well as curfews across the nation. The subject of a health passport has been introduced in both the US and Canada. Now the US is trying to backdoor this by approving of private firms allowing these health passports to be rolled out. That's Uncle Joe for you. Never a freedom that he didn't want to take away from you. Let's roll down a few paragraphs now to where they mention where a few more of these liberties are being taken away from the Europeans. France is not the only EU nation that has backslid on democracy. See what I mean? Where you could just say Western culture has backslid on democracy because, like I said, it's also happened in the US and Canada. In Austria, Slovenia, Belgium, and Lithuania, to name a few, there is serious concern that governments have misused existing laws to restrict the liberty of citizens. You can say that for any number of US states and the entirety of Canada. There have been curfews in the United States and Canada. There have been restrictions on our liberties. You have been refused the right to gather and talk about politics in numbers. You have been refused the right to go to parks, to exercise. You have been even refused the right to attend your local church service in many states. How is this different than anywhere in Europe? I love this next part. The most egregious example probably comes from Hungary, where the government passed legislation that allowed it to rule by decree with no judicial review. Doesn't that remind you of Michigan and Governor Whitmer's refusal to abide by her own state Supreme Court's rulings? The left has used this Dem panic to restrict our freedoms, At least in Europe, there have been many demonstrations to protest these violations of their freedoms. Here in the United States, if you live in a democratic state, I don't remember seeing or reading about any large demonstrations against the wearing of the face diaper, against the closing of churches, against the restrictions of your right to gather and talk about politics. This erosion of our freedoms has been going on for a long time. If the legacy media hadn't been so anti-democratic, if all the old tech sites like Facebook and YouTube and Twitter hadn't been against free speech, this wouldn't have happened. Fortunately, there are new tech sites out there. If you're a member of a new tech site like Minds or Gab or BitChute, you at least realize that your freedom of speech is in jeopardy. Remember how President Trump was shut down while he was still in office from these old tech sites? He was shut down from Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. The legacy media wouldn't even broadcast his presidential speeches towards the end. Now, speaking of President Trump, let me end this by going to his website. It's not all doom and gloom, is it? Take a look at this from the desk of Donald J. Trump. Breaking news, new polling by CBS News on the state of the Republican Party, which is very strong. President Trump has a strong hold on the GOP. 80% of Republicans agree with the removal of Liz Cheney. Are you trying to tell me that 20% of the GOP are rhinos? Seems kind of a big number to me that 20% of the GOP are rhinos. Only 20% disagree. Like I said, that seems like a too large a number. The poll also showed that 67% of Republicans said that they do not consider Sleepy Joe Biden to be the legitimate winner of the 2020 presidential election. Again, I think that number is low. It is a CBS poll, so there is that. I agree with them 100%. Just look at the facts and the data. There is no way he won in the 2020 presidential election. Bravo, President Trump. I'll be voting for him in 2024.